Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
My stream errored for some reason, but it looks like it's working now.
I can see it up. I'm not sure about audio on the stream though.
What?
I'm not sure about audio on the stream.
OBS is picking up audio from both of us.
Yep, I've got so I haven't muted the stream, but I can't hear anything. So, but if OBS is saying it is, that's probably just something on my end.
I unmuted it and then I got echo, so I think it's working.
Okay. All right.
It'll be fine.
Okay. All right. I think we're good then.
Yeah. So you didn't get to more grammar or anything, is that right?
Yeah. No. I didn't have time with traveling and things, but yeah. No, I did sort of consume some FI stuff, but that was mostly audio and things on the way driving.
Okay, so we could do more text analysis, or we could think about what else to do.
Maybe both would probably be good at some point. I did listen to a bunch of your podcasts that I hadn't caught up on the way. So like the journaling stuff and things like that I thought had some good ideas. Maybe we could discuss some of that later, but text analysis is probably the best, or it's the easiest thing to start with now, I reckon.
Okay, so we started the line essay, and we started your Flux article, and we're doing the Szasz ones. Do you have a preference about what to work on?
Not particularly. I mean, the Zaz stuff, or the Zaz stuff was, I feel like is sort of good as a, I guess a bit of a warm-up type thing again. Yeah, but no real preference.
Okay, well we've done 2 and 3, so let's try number 1.
Sounds good. One thing as well, just because I saw some discussion about it. What do you call it? The first sentence of the Declaration of Independence. I'm not sure if that'd be fun to analyze, but that looked, substantive.
Yeah, I think that one would work more as a grammar thing than a text analysis.
Yep. Okay. So I haven't read this, so that's probably a good place to start. Okay, so myth of mental illness. We've got the topic sentence again. I do one thing just about the the manifesto here. I'm not sure if it's particularly significant, but there's it feels like there's inconsistency in this opening sentence thing. I guess it makes sense with the quote here because he's sort of talking about, he's responding to, I guess, I don't know how I'd put it, like a generalization of an idea, or like this. It feels more appropriate with the idea of like the myth in there. And the other paragraphs are then more in line with his particular ideas.
I don't know why the quoting is like this. Normally he puts scare quotes around mental illness, but here it's around myth of mental illness, so that's odd. Like you can see it down below that he has quotes around mental illness here. That's
Oh
usually
yeah.
already scare quotes. But I don't know if there's
And that
like
would,
a typo or transcription error or something when it got changed, or what's
it
going
does
on
make
there.
more sense if, yeah, if it was like the myth of quote mental illness. That does make, just like it makes a bit more sense. Okay, so mental illness is a metaphor, metaphorical disease. All right, so I think that's fairly easy to sort of understand what he's getting at, even though it's sort of not quite sure what metaphorical disease is. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting way to put it. The word disease denotes a demonstrable biological process that affects the bodies of living organisms, plants, animals, and humans.
Yeah, hold on. So the
Yep.
the main meaning of metaphor is that it contrasts with literal. It's something that's kind of similar to something else, and we're drawing a comparison, but it isn't actually the something else.
Yep.
So there's some way that people compare mental illness with diseases, and he's not saying that there's no comparison there. He's saying that it's not actually a disease though. And the comparison is limited. Like it's not like a disease in some important ways.
Yes. Yep. Um, that makes sense. I mean, I definitely feel like I understand what he's getting at.
Yeah, and people they equivocate between like admitting that it's just a metaphor and also taking it overly literally. Because there's a major movement to take so-called mental problems and declare them to be medical issues rather than
Yeah.
more like philosophical or issues with living.
Um, yeah. I'm sort of just looking at the thing here, published in 1998. I
What's
feel like that's
98?
yeah,
Oh, this manifesto.
yeah. Um, it's sort of ahead of the time as such in that,
Oh, well,
yeah,
he
the idea of
started
calling
this
it.
way earlier. I'm looking for a date. His book, Myth of Mental Illness, is from 1961.
Wow.
I think it was like his second or third book as well, not his first one.
The idea of calling it a disease, though, feels very recent in the scheme of things, or I feel like at least it's been pushed a lot recently.
These are all like reprint dates or something because they're later.
Hmm. Okay, yep. So
Yes,
we've
the
got a
issue
definition
is
of,
it's definitely a recent issue as well.
in terms of just that people have been talking about it, bringing it up recently.
Yeah, and it's a major part of society today. It hasn't gone away or anything.
Yeah. Yep.
But the main themes behind it are older, and it's been a long-term trend. Yeah, Szasz, by the way, I had conversations with him for about a year by email right before he died. He died in 2012 or something. Yeah, 2012. And he was writing up until his death in his 90s.
I might just mute myself for a tick and try and confirm um, that the live stream has got sound, so I still
Sure.
can't hear anything. I refresh the page, so I still
Sure.
can't hear anything. I refresh the page.
It's got sound for my preview, just check.
Yep. No, I can hear it now. I don't know why it's not coming over my headphones, but it is coming over the other stuff. Oh, I think I know why. Um, oh no, okay. No, there's like weird stuff with what do you call it? With like headphones that have like hands-free stuff, and that sometimes they've got two audio outputs. Okay. So Okay, so we've got. Oops. This sort of, so the first sentence there is, I mean, it essentially feels like an expansion of the, if we call the first sentence or the quote sentence the topic sentence, then it immediately just expands sort of like as a restatement, a more specific restatement.
Yeah, it says what the myth is.
And then we have an expansion on that, or rather or if it's an expansion, it's the defining disease, which presumably is then going to be used to support the claim that it's metaphorical. The term mental illness refers to the undesirable thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of a person. So this is sort of like another definition. Classifying thoughts, feelings, and behaviors as diseases is a logical and semantic error, like classifying the whale as a fish. So we've got, I mean, it directly, in terms of the structure of this, it feels like it, I mean, it uses both of the above, both of the previous two sentences. And then I guess it's, yeah, as the whale is not a fish, mental illness is not a disease. Individuals with brain diseases, bad brains, or kidney disease, bad kidneys, are literally sick.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, again, is to focus on stating the connections between the nodes when you're connecting them as a full sentence, and try to be really explicit about what the relationships are.
Yeah, okay. So, sort of like the first one there, mental illness is a metaphor, metaphorical disease. It occurs to me that he's referring to two, or it's somewhat unclear when he says it is a metaphor, and then in parentheses immediately afterwards sort of implies that it is a metaphorical disease, in that they're not definitions on the same level. But I understand what he means there. So it's not a disease because.
Yeah, he's trying to explain it. He's telling us that it's a metaphorical disease, then he tells us what a disease is, then he tells us what mental illness actually refers to. So we have a comparison.
All right. So in terms of these links, these connections here, I feel like the first two make a bit of sense on their own. But then I'm not confident about this one, like as in, this is an error because I can make that a bit bigger, by the way, if that's helpful.
Oh, yeah, I can read it okay. Yeah, that's a reasonable connection. He's telling us what the things are so we can make a comparison, and then he's also going to try to explain the error.
Yeah. Um,
It kind of more goes under the original heading,
uh,
like the myth of mental illness category, rather than the claim that mental illness is a metaphor. Because it's a
yeah,
follow-up
okay.
more on the myth aspect than on what mental illness is.
So, okay. So, I see what you mean. So these two are direct expansions on the meanings behind the myth of mental illness, particularly via the mental illness is a metaphorical disease, where we essentially get definitions for both parts of that, for mental illness and for disease.
Yeah.
And then going back to the topic sentence, we've got that the idea of mental illness being a disease is wrong because classifying thoughts, feelings, and behaviors as diseases is a logical and semantic error, like classifying a whale as a fish explicitly. As the whale is not a fish, mental illness is not a disease. Individuals with brain diseases, bad brains, or kidney diseases, bad kidneys, are literally sick. So literally is an important word there. That contrasts the idea of metaphorical that we've just been talking about. So I feel like this is a sibling of what we just had. And
Yeah, this is it's no longer about the whale. So it shouldn't be a child of the whale thing.
So I mean, I feel like the classifying thoughts bubble is about the error.
Yeah, this could go in several places. Next one.
The brain diseases. This may it does. I mean, it's okay. So because it links to several things, it makes sense to put it as a new topic because it refers to diseases and the idea of literally. So we've sort of got this. Diseases have to have literal meanings. There's physical issues with brains and kidneys in this example. All right. I'm not necessarily sure on that one yet, but maybe we'll get more context as we go. So you have individuals with mental diseases, bad behaviors, like societies with economic diseases, bad fiscal policies, are metaphorically sick, and that there might be a problem there, but it is not a disease. There's a pretty strong, like there's multiple hints back to this, the sentence immediately beforehand with the parentheticals.
Yeah, so he's drawing a direct contrast here. This one's telling us what literal sickness is, And this one's telling us what metaphorical sickness is.
Yeah.
Previously, he was telling us that categorizing something that is not literally something else is an error. Now he's explaining that that's what's being done. I think the final sentence should explain it. Classification of misbehavior as illness provides an ideological justification for state-sponsored social control as medical treatment. So this is the consequences of the myth.
Yep. So we've got the idea of behavior, so bad behaviors here, as illness, where we previously have, I mean, the idea of disease and illness is somewhat interchangeable. So we've got a reference back to that. And we now have a sort of like assertions slash sort of leading into the next topic in terms of this state-sponsored control as medical treatment is a new sort of idea here. So bad things are possible because of the ways that we've done this. Yeah, I don't feel like we can really put it under anything else, or it doesn't make sense to, even though it sort of talks to these two. Or talks to all the, well, particularly it's the yellow and red sort of things here.
Yeah, it doesn't quite have direct relationships. He's trying to explain what the myth is so that he can tell us what's actually going on, because what's not going on is people being literal, logical, and rational. They're insisting on this weird error, and why are they doing that? Now we find out.
So, yep, so I've just put, well, this is a comment, sort of like yours. So yeah, so the error allows us to justify things that would otherwise be more obviously irrational. But when we make this mistake, then it makes this other things seem more rational, or seem rational when it's not, because of the error that's been made.
Yes, if you will take it literally, sometimes it helps enable this other thing.
Yep. There's sort of some implication there as well that if there are any real problems here, this is not the best way to deal with them. I mean, going with thinking about the idea of explanations and predictability, we're going to get some undesirable effects here, unless, of course, the point was state-sponsored control, in which case this is, more of an engineered sort of thing. And so the undesirable effects might actually be desired effects. Yeah, which is an idea that obviously Beginning of Infinity talks about with explanations and predictability, but then the choice talks about it as well, which I thought was quite quite interesting in the idea of conflicts and unacceptable compromises or bad compromises. To the point where I think Efrat mentions explicitly that she doesn't know of, or she can't think of like undesirable things that weren't the result of a bad compromise.
Yeah, the history of mental illness is interesting. I think the basic place it comes from is that people do things that other people don't want them to do. This unwanted behavior or misbehavior. And in the past, in some sense, this was not a problem because there were solutions available, which were violence and authority. If someone was below you in social status, especially if there's a direct relationship there, you're a child, you're subordinate, something like that, you can give them orders. And as society became more liberal and peaceful and anti-violence, anti-authority and anti-slavery and so on, it presented this problem of how do you control people if you're not allowed to threaten them with punches? What can justify that? And how do you get away with it and so on? And so the veneer of science and medicine provided an excuse.
Yeah, in the same way that, yeah, we might ostracize leper colonies type thing, but that now we have, well, something that, I mean, there's a lot of, obviously the follow-up paragraphs go into more detail, but it's using, an authority that you can't argue against. There's no, due process with that.
Yeah, they literally use it to go around the legal system.
Yeah.
And they literally use it to control their children. That's one of the more common purposes, is children don't sit still in school, and we need to bring in people to make them. And for example, there's the famous Rosemary Kennedy case, where a daughter of a major political family was going out and partying and misbehaving and embarrassing her father and so on. And so they got her a lobotomy so that she would stop doing that. Szasz has written about this one somewhere, but I don't remember where. Yeah, once she had the lobotomy, she didn't do very much anymore for the rest of her life.
Yeah, I mean, it's unsurprising when you remove parts of someone's brain, they lose a lot of function. That's awful.
Yeah. But you can kind of imagine if it was 100 years earlier, that the father of the family would have just scared her more and she wouldn't have dared disobey, because they were just more brutal back then. They need a kind of substitute to control people.
Violence was more acceptable. Or, the other methods of scaring them as well.
I mean, they even sent her to a school to be, like, controlled by a bunch of nuns, and that didn't even work, because society was getting more liberal.
Yeah. Anyway, so in terms of the Zaz paragraph, that feels like... So I think we've got... It's a bit hard to compare the trees directly and easily because...
they're about the
using
same.
labels as opposed to things. But it looks, I think the way I'm just directly comparing them is the length of the things. So you've got 2 boxes for every one of mine, and then it makes a lot of sense that way. Yeah. Okay.
I think when people read, they gloss over what they're reading too much. They're like, well, that kind of makes sense. It sounds about right. And they don't think through what all the connections actually are, and then this leads to problems when it turns out they don't understand some of the parts. And they need like a better autopilot that does more of this stuff automatically as they read.
Yeah, the connections I think make a lot of sense in terms of like pulling those out are, or is I guess the main function of what I imagine is good about such an autopilot, particularly because it tells you the organization of the information, like the relationships between them, not just what the words say, which I don't think anyone would, people would tend not to have too much trouble with just understanding the meaning of the words.
Yeah, the individual sentences are easier than understanding how they fit together and build something bigger. I ran into this a lot in discussions where I realized that what people were saying was not responsive to what I said. Like they weren't seeing how the different messages in the discussion fit together. A lot of them seemed like they were written in a very local way, where they were thinking about the message they were writing right now, like this paragraph, and maybe the parent. And they would seem to forget like the previous parents and the context a lot. So there's something about keeping things related that people have issues with.
It's one of the things that occurs to me is that I tend to write like there's a bit of a stream of consciousness type aspect, which doesn't help clarity, of course, but it means that it's quite difficult to go down like a tree of the structure of an idea and come back up each branch and finish them all off. Whereas if you're only referring to like the last few sentences or the last two paragraphs, or the current and the previous paragraph, it's very easy to write a lot. Like it's low effort and low energy writing. So it sort of makes sense as a default state for people to be in if they don't think about it.
Yeah, two things about that. First is writing by yourself is easier in some ways, to make everything like actually related. Whereas when you're having a discussion with someone else and you're having to relate your ideas and their ideas, that adds an extra layer of complexity compared to you're in control of all the ideas that have to be related to each other. It's the same when you're reading. If you're reading and you're thinking about it, then you have the ideas in the book and your own ideas, and you have to relate them together. It's not just your ideas, so it's harder in a way.
Yes, yeah. Then there's you've got to make sure you interpret their ideas correctly at the same time. And particularly, I mean, it occurs to me, it's easy to get really distracted. Like if you're having a conversation with someone, typically, if it's just for entertainment, then those distractions are good in that it allows you to keep this conversation going near indefinitely. And then if you ever run out of things to say on one, you just unwind the stack 3 or 4 times and you're back to sort of new topics. But that's not good for information transfer or actually understanding what the other person thinks, because you're unable to actually finish anything. So it's far more entertaining, but far less useful.
Yes, the other thing about stream of consciousness is it's a little bit like writing a small script when you're coding, as opposed to working on a large project. So you're dealing with a lot less structure. And you're only thinking about local things instead of how it interacts with a bunch of other parts of the program. And that makes it a lot easier. For big, complicated programs, like a significant portion of all the energy goes into organizing it, rather than how do I locally make this function do a particular thing. Like the majority of effort is actually how do we make everything fit together, and when we update this part, how do we make sure that everything else still works and like have modularity and so on.
Plumbing. I think it's the thing people complain about the most as well.
Yeah, but I think writing and discussion and stuff are a lot like that, and a lot of what people do in those is they just avoid the hard stuff. They avoid the large programs and the big structures because they don't put in the sort of effort that large software companies do. They're not able to deal with complex structures. It just doesn't work. They're always stuck like making little local points and never having much of a complete worldview that's all consistent.
Yeah.
I see that a lot. That's part of why stream of consciousness writing is easier. And it's definitely a useful skill. Like it's not a bad thing. But if it's all you can do, then you're missing something.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, you've got the first sentence of the Declaration of Independence
Okay.
up there. Should we? So this is, I mean, yeah, this would be, in terms of grammar stuff, this is at least twice as long as, I think, the longest sentence
Yeah.
in any of the exercises.
There's actually a really long sentence from Atlas Shrugged that Peikoff uses as an example that people analyzed on FI. That's I think it's longer than this.
So in general, long sentences are not very good. Like they make it harder to convey meaning and make it harder to keep everything straight and potentially hide like connections between ideas and things as well. But presumably, I mean, obviously, Declaration of Independence had a fair amount of thought that went into it, as well as Atlas Shrugged. I guess, yeah, we should only have long sentences like this when the idea is complex enough to require that level of integration.
So with the Declaration of Independence, they wrote that a long time ago, and the writing style back then was a lot more complicated. Like we've improved over time and made it simpler, clearer, and more direct. So I wouldn't take it as a guideline for what to do. I think but you can compare it to other stuff at the time and then see like how overly complicated and stuff it is compared to other stuff, and it's probably okay.
Yeah, okay. I imagine that, yeah, I mean, definitely writing styles have changed a lot. Thinking about this, it probably makes sense to do to break it down into clauses and phrases first, just because it's so unwieldy.
Yep, that is a good idea, is trying to get an outline, an overview of what's going on.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, man, it's a beast. So in terms of this is so. I mean, the when in the course of human events feels somewhat parenthetical anyway. So in terms of a conjunction, I'm not even sure if that is or it's a predicate. I need to grab a dictionary. And then we've got the first and, or the first conjunction, I think. We have it that or becomes. Is that conjunction? No.
Becomes looks like a verb. I'm trying to find
Yeah.
the Atlas
Yep.
Shrugged sentence right now. I haven't read this one carefully.
Okay. So. Okay, so when in the course of human events is applying to it becomes necessary. Okay, so this is potentially confusing because it could be used, like we could say when it becomes necessary for blah in the course of human events, as opposed to, oh wait, no, that's always the reading, I think. It's just that when they've said when in the course of human events, this is the subordinate phrase, or if it's used as a conjunction, then it needs to be a subordinate clause. It can't be a phrase, right? In the course of human events is a prepositional phrase, though. So, don't think it's a conjunction.
Yeah, you want to look one up, and you will find relative adverb. So it might be that.
Yeah, so I can see, I'm just using Google, which seems to, I think that uses OED.
Google uses New Oxford Dictionary. It's this one right here.
Okay, oops, I need to get back to that. Yeah, okay, yep. It's sort of annoying in that it doesn't seem to, it hides some details. So like it's got two adverbs here, but it doesn't say relative adverb for the second one. Okay. I don't have enough monitors anymore.
Anyways, okay, so this Taggart sentence, which is very long, from Rand, what I thought I remembered and wanted to point out is that this is a very literary sentence. She's not doing this to make a complex philosophical point. She's doing this in an artistic way. Like, it's not part of Galt's speech. It's not like a lecture. It's not nonfiction. So there's a lot more excuse for this when it's a artistic literary thing, for it to be such a long sentence.
Yeah.
And she wanted to have like fit multiple parallels into a sentence.
So yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard to pass by looking at it, but it looks like we've got a parenthetical in the middle between the first two M dashes, or they're even wider than M dashes by the looks.
Yeah, here's the actual structure. This was A, this was B, this was C, and this was D. So she's just paralleling four things.
Yep.
It's not actually that hard to read. Like, for a sentence this long, it's really easy to read. Relative to a typical sentence this long.
Yeah.
One of the things you'll notice about it is it doesn't have a lot of punctuation variation. So some sentences have like a colon and dashes and parentheses, and those tend to be really complicated. This is only commas and dashes. So there's more consistency and like self-similarity.
Means
instead
as
of
well
doing
that you
a
don't have
variety of things.
You don't have to think about what they mean relative to each other. Like if there's, say, a colon and a semicolon and parentheticals, then figuring out sort of the like the rank of each as such is more complex. Whereas when you've because this is simple in terms of the punctuation library or vocabulary type thing that it's using, isn't just dashes and commas, keeps everything on the same level fairly effectively.
Yeah. Okay, so the Declaration of Independence.
So
what I would do first is try to turn this into a very brief outline. So just see what the structure is. So this is the declaration, and the rest is modifiers. This part is a fragment. By the way, I saw different versions that just started at the word when. So it's possible we should just ignore this first part. Anyway, so
the comma after, like, when in the course of human events, comma, I mean, I don't think that comma makes sense if you take out the declaration. It, like, when in the course it becomes necessary, it feels like a comma there is a makes it more ambiguous, not less.
Well, if you view this as a parenthetical, like commas on both sides, is a mild version of parentheses. And then you try to omit it, you got the declaration it becomes, which doesn't work. Because this is just a fragment. And you just end up with double noun, like declaration and then it. So there's some issue here. Anyways, so the declaration, one in the course, or I can delete that. Okay, so declaration, one in course. It becomes necessary, and then we have 4x. I think I can just delete that whole section. One people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one. Yeah, that's all modifiers, so we're going to have 4x. And y. Yeah, so this is another, it's necessary for, I think there's implied repetition. Like, I'm trying to figure out how much the and is repeating, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm just thinking
what the grouping for the and is.
Yeah. I feel like maybe taking out, or actually I'm gonna try and do an outline in a more incremental way, like because it's like the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. I feel like I might end up making a mistake if we take out too much at once.
Sure. Go ahead and try it however you want.
To which X entitled them, or Z, I guess we're up to.
Yeah, this reminds me. So relevant videos are the grammar ones, which have a bunch of text analysis as well. And I have this video called Reading Hard Passages. It's just about like one paragraph from Riesman's book for like half an hour video or something. You might like that one too. God blinks.
Yeah.
It's a kind of similar thing. Oh, our video. Maybe it was a couple paragraphs.
Yeah. And that does look good. In terms of the sentence, so I mean, I'm not particularly familiar with it. I might have read it before, but I feel like I need to actually just so I don't actually know what it says in terms of. So unanimous declaration of blah, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for fixing politics or fixing our relationships to each other. And to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. So
yeah, it's confusing. There's some sort of complicated structure. I was reading this earlier when people brought it up. And I think you have to kind of get to the end for it to make sense. And also, yeah, when I saw it before, it didn't have the first part. I think it might basically be a colon, but it's like old style. They had a comma for some reason. But if the first thing had a colon after it, it would make more sense. Like the declaration, colon, and then here's the declaration.
Yeah, that does. All right, we'll stick that in the outline. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. And we don't have separation is only used once. The separation. This is the separation referred to dissolve.
Oh, here, this one has it formatted differently. This is just like a subtitle. rather than part of the paragraph.
Okay, so that fits with the colon interpretation essentially.
Yeah. Let's see what
Except that it's
Wikipedia
more,
has.
a colon would be more about
Oh,
this
there's a
one sentence as
facsimile.
opposed to the document.
Okay, the facsimile has a comma, but it's also a separate paragraph.
Yeah, okay, this makes more sense. It looks like a title with
Yeah.
colon.
Okay, so we're not going to worry about that part then.
Easy. So when we come to the situation where we need to dissolve political bans and sort of take our natural sort of God-given right type idea, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind require, so to be a decent rational person, we should declare the causes which have led us to this. So if we want to say that we don't want to be friends with you anymore, it's only decent if we tell you why. And this is what the declaration is. This is why we don't want to be friends.
Yes, I think that's their main point. It seems like there might be an implied then somewhere around here. Like, when X, then Y.
So it feels like, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary, it's not that, just being in the course of human events means that it's, always necessary or thing, then it becomes necessary. So then a decent respect to the opinions of mankind require. So yeah, okay. So it feels like if we we're going to put a then in, then doing it before a decent respect feels like a good place. That's essentially the counterpoint, or the what we're following on to.
I think they just use commas that are not how we use them in modern English. Like this one at the beginning, I think we would consider wrong. And then also, I'm wondering about this other one right here between Earth and the separate. I think this comma might also be making it more confusing instead of helping.
Yeah, it feels like the powers of the earth sounds sort of like a phrase that would fit in like classical liberalism in terms of.
Or we could have a second comma to like set off this optional part. I think the thing we're assuming might be the separate and equal station rather than the among the powers.
Well, I feel like assume the powers of the earth, and then powers of the earth colon the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. Because we're definitely assuming the things that are entitled, or they're assuming the things that are entitled. It depends on how. So if we say like to assume our y, as I sort of put here, the separate and equal station to which said entitle them, I feel like that could all be part of the noun. In that is part, like it's a modifier on the laws of nature and of nature's God. Or it's a part of that equal station of which. Like there could be other laws of nature, but these are the ones that are like birthrights.
Okay, I think I got the structure figured out by deleting most of the words.
Yeah.
Most of them are modifiers in some sense. So you kind of delete all the modifiers and you want to get the verbs, the objects, and the conjunctions, and sometimes prepositions. And if you have the preposition, you need the noun that goes with it. Sometimes you can just drop prepositional phrases, but sometimes they're kind of important.
Yep.
And you occasionally have to keep modifiers like not be pretty important depending on what you're doing. But you can usually drop most of the modifiers and make it more just nouns and verbs and conjunctions and get a better idea of what it says.
Yeah, okay. So I feel like I've got more of a grasp on it. So when in the course it becomes necessary to not be friends, and essentially, I mean, well, I guess this makes sense more in the political context, but to assume like our birthright, that's really what that is sort of saying. So when it's necessary to assume our birthright and break up with you, because we think we're decent, we need to tell you why, is essentially what the sentence says.
Yes. I think so. I think if you read my version, it makes the grammatical structure a lot clearer. So when in course it becomes necessary. Necessary for what? For people to dissolve bands, and second thing, necessary for people to assume station. The station being the birthright stuff. Then respect requires that they declare causes.
Yeah.
And that's basically readable now.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. There is a lot of flowery, which I mean, fits the time period.
Yeah, like I dropped this among the powers of earth part, and this to which the laws of nature and God entitle them. I think those are kind of just modifiers.
Yeah.
That don't affect the core meaning.
No, station is definitely the thing being modified. Yeah, station. It feels like a really archaic use of the word. I can't think of a time where I've actually read it in modern English.
Oh yeah, it's more of a caste society, status society type of word. So we've moved away from talking about people's station. I've heard it sometimes, but it's kind of insulting to bring up people's station. Like, it kind of contradicts the American idea of upward mobility a bit.
Yeah. It's yeah. So it's your duty to society, and you don't get to sort of move out of it type thing. Well, I mean, the place where someone or something stands or is placed on military or other duty. It sounds like essentially a way to talk about one's position in society. Oh, here we go. Dated, one's social rank or position.
Yeah, that one.
Karen was getting ideas above a station. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people still think that way, plenty, but it's like rude to say it out loud explicitly. You're supposed to be more subtle when you're saying you're beneath me or something.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like going into much more, or I'm not sure there's too much point in trying to break down this anymore, in that it sort of just feels like an exercise of.
Yeah. Yeah, I find this kind of analysis that I did is pretty useful, and then once you figure out the structure, it's not that hard. You just like read through it for the details, the modifiers. You know what they're saying more.
Yeah. It occurs to me the sort of in this style, it would sort of like the part 4 exercises. asking these questions, you would start by asking the questions on a far broader sort of thing, in that, you know, the details of the course are human events. The details of like not being friends is like dissolving political bands, particularly, or the details of the bands that they are political. And you can sort of, yeah, the birthright is, you know, half of the paragraph. You can sort of answer it like that, and then it becomes pretty clear. And any subtleties are pretty easy to identify at that point, or at least to point to where they would occur.
Okay, I sent you the Atlas Shrugged sentence and also my my broad structural overview. So I thought it would be good if you tried looking at it, given the hints about what the structure is, and just figure out like which words go with which part, so you like figure out how it works, given the main structure already.
Okay, so this was Taggart Terminal, she thought. So I don't know whether that's pointing forward or backwards at this point, but this room, not the giant concourse in New York, this was her goal. The end of the track, the point beyond the curve of the earth where the two straight lines of rail met and vanished, drawing her forward. So this whole thing is describing the room as they had drawn Nathan Taggart. This was the goal Taggart had seen in the distance, and this was the point still holding the straight line glance of his lifted head above the spiral motion of men in the granite concourse. So, yeah, okay, so I'm not exactly clear whether there's, how much, to what extent, like Taggart Terminal is particularly being reduced to this room in this case, in that both whoever she is and Nathaniel Taggart, they've both got this intimate relationship with this room, as opposed to the broader concourse sort of thing, the distraction.
Yeah, don't try not to get hung up on the content too much. Like, which part is this was A, and like which part is B, and so on. You don't have to actually know what she means by relating the terminal with the room, which is just like part of the story.
Yeah, that's plot related, I imagine. Um, so, what is... So, oh, okay, I've misread this. I had seen the distance, and this was still the point, still holding the straight line glance of his lifted head. So that's talking about Taggart. So yep, so we've got like, this was X, and then a clarification, not this X1, which is sort of referred to later on for artistic flair. Then X is Y. There's sort of an equivalence, but it's introducing this new, more specific idea. And we've got this idea of her goal. So there's two things that this refers to throughout the sentence. It's like both the goal, which is somewhat sort of in common and overlapping between Taggart and her, and the room, which is, I presume, it's the more literal interpretation of Taggart Terminal, and the more metaphorical interpretation is the goal.
Well, okay,
there's a lot of-
FYI. So the room is not literally Taggart Terminal. Taggart Terminal is literally the giant concourse in New York.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My reading was that, like, Taggart Terminal, like the meaning of Taggart Terminal, both for her and for Taggart, is more to do with the room than the grand concourse.
Yeah.
But people in general would talk about the concourse, not this special room. So we've got, like, this is X, specification, and then a relation to Y, like her goal, the metaphorical idea. There's then this second thing of, this was the goal Nathaniel Taggart had seen, so there's like this other application of Y as a goal of NT, and then we've got this new idea as well of Z, the point still holding the straight line glance of his head. So the point is referring to the room, presumably, but is talking more about the, it's more like literal in the idea of like the outside part of the room or the part of the wall or whatever else that you look at if you're focused on the room. So there's like a second literal interpretation, but that has like a geometric construction, but is still not the room itself. And it only has meaning particularly for those with this goal or this overlapping, whatever the overlapping part of the goal is.
Yeah, it seems like you have a decent handle on the sentence, but you're also doing it in a somewhat different way than me. So I think that might be important.
Yep.
It looks to me like you're mixing different steps together that I would do separately. And I think that makes it a bit more complicated.
Okay, yeah.
What you're doing is very common because with most sentences it's like not very hard, so you can like lump steps together anyways, and it's fine. But for this one, what I did is I just wanted to know the structure first without getting into the content. So I tried to look at only the grammatical structure without doing content analysis, and separated the content analysis until later, after I had separated it. So I split it into these 4 parts here. And so in this part, I'm just looking at like, this is part 1 of the sentence, this is part 2, this is part 3, this is part 4, and then we can put them in this very brief summary of what the structure is. This was A, this was B, this was C, and this was D. And this gives you like a lot of guidance for understanding what's going on. It gives you like slots to fit the information into.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I find it harder, more difficult to figure out what's going on with the content before you have a full picture of where things go, how they fit together.
Yeah. So I think I'm sort of relying on a bit of a crutch of intuition sort of thing, in that the way that I've done this stuff in the past has been like I've had an intuition of grammar, not explicit, and then use that to get an intuition of the meaning, and then reverse engineer from there, which is more error prone at the very least, because it means that I need to I can't use breaking down the sentence as a tool to understand
figure out the meaning.
Except maybe in like a spiral sort of way.
That makes sense, because the meaning does give you hints about the structure. Like, if you can figure out the meaning, it's going to be easier to figure out the structure. If you figure out the structure, it's easier to figure out the meaning. Like, you can start with either one, and it helps with the other one. But structure is more mechanical. It's more like of a pure logic kind of thing. So it's a little harder to get stuck on. Like, it's a bit of a simpler skill. Because content is sort of the sky's the limit on how difficult or confusing it is. Whereas structure is more of a limited game where it only gets like so hard, and there's so like once you know how to analyze structure to a high degree, you should be sort of able to do any structure. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The only part I think that would be ambiguous for this sentence is so where it says so this was her goal, not the end of the track, the point beyond the curve, or the end of the track, the point beyond the curve. And then drawing her forward as they had drawn Taggart. And then we've got the next to this. And the reading of it like this, or what it seems to me, the structural reading has the first dash is ended by the third dash, not the second dash. The second dash is more like a colon.
That was the thing I noted here. That was one of the things that made the structure hard to figure out compared to most sentences, is that part C had a dash in the middle of it, but it's just for a relatively minor aside. So when I was first trying to figure out the structure, I'm just like, I'll find all the dashes, this should be easy, and then it didn't quite work out that way.
It does make it, the fact that like the word this is used, it's sort of like we've got the conjunction of this, and they pretty clearly signal each part of the sentence, each component. But it does feel like, a dash is maybe not the best tool to use there.
Yeah,
like
it's hard to do it with like
clearer.
With pure 100% structure. Like, I think reading this and saying as they had drawn Nathaniel Taggart, you're like, okay, well that's a bit of a modifier or an aside or something. That's not a main point.
Yeah,
and that helps you figure it out.
It was once so looking, as I was sort of looking through it, looking at the second dash, it was pretty quick to spot that it wasn't the end of the thing structurally, because it doesn't make sense to end that and then go as they'd drawn Nathaniel Taggart, particularly because the drawing is immediately beforehand. So you need very minor amounts of information about the content to actually figure that out. There's like a little bit of correction that you need to do there, but it's pretty straightforward.
This one's also a fragment instead of a complete sentence.
Yep.
It doesn't stand alone, whereas a this was X makes a complete sentence by itself.
Yeah, at all the other parts we could put a full stop in, and grammatically things would hold up for the most part.
Yeah, I was going to say the structure thing is like, if you look at Lisp code, the S expression structure is relatively simple, and you can like fully analyze it even if you don't know what the code is doing. And English is a bit like that, except with a significantly more complicated structure, but still not as complicated as what the code's actually doing, or what the words mean.
Yes. Yep. Makes a lot of sense. So I've noted down here, just like that I've got this reliance on sentence to meaning to structure, and need to practice structure first. Which I think
I think looking for the verbs was one of the main things I did when I was trying to figure this out. Not just the dashes. Verbs are often a key place to look.
I was thinking about that in regards to, so I've written down, like in your, this is like we've got this was A, this was B, this was C, this was D. Was being the verb there, it sort of makes it like particularly more straightforward in that, like each sentence here or each clause has there's not much space. There's not much modification on the noun at the beginning of the clause. It's basically just X is, and then all the meat of the sentence is after that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to do a few more details at the end of the email. There was a big thread, and I think there's very little discussion after I posted. I think I was a bit late to it, but I thought other people were like a lot more confused by the sentence, and then didn't really want to compare theirs with mine.
Was there much like complete analysis, or was it more sort of like, I mean, yeah, I tend to, or my suspicion is that I would tend to sort of comment on the ambiguity and use that as an excuse to avoid actually trying to finish the analysis.
So this gives you an idea. So I'm searching just like a significant chunk of the words from the quote, and you get all these emails. They did a lot of analysis. Where's mine? Yeah, mine's towards the end though.
Yeah.
Yeah, parts of speech, and then we have like this much stuff just for parts of speech. There's a lot of detailed analysis here.
It does occur to me that analysis can be maybe
Right,
a bit
this
of
is
a
a
trap
different
if
thing.
you. Oh yeah.
Oh, taking
analyzing
feedback on whether I should do the hard one. Then we have another one. I'm not really sure where to begin analyzing this. Right, so people having trouble. And
well, I
did
think
clause and phrase groupings. Yeah, this is a pretty complete looking analysis with 8 clauses.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things you can see is their analysis is like much more complicated, whereas I found a way to simplify it and get what the essential structure was.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it becomes
A
almost
couple
trivial once you
hours.
break it down. Wow. Yeah.
All right, trying again. Kate made sentence diagrams in the non-tree style, the one they teach in school.
Oh yeah.
Things are messy. Oh yeah, there's a sentence diagram of the Declaration of Independence one, which was also very, very unreadable looking.
Yeah, I saw you
came up.
Drew some some circles around the various parts. Which
Oh no, that was just a screenshot. Someone else had done that.
Oh, okay, okay.
The person who made the diagram did that because they realized the diagram was unreadable.
Was it? Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes more sense to analyze the declaration as like a paragraph rather than rather than a sentence, and then analyze the clauses as sentences if you wanted to. Yeah, which I think was essentially what we did. I might just grab a drink and I'll be back in a tick. Still got headphones. Cool. Okay. All right. Should we keep going with the overview?
Overview? Oh.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier listening to some podcasts and having some stuff to talk about or some questions or something, I think.
So yeah, I listened to a lot. I don't have any particular questions that came to mind. I mean, I was driving, so I couldn't really write anything down.
Right.
But I thought it was good. I wanted to send the journaling one to a friend of mine. So I feel like it'd be fairly approachable and similar to stuff that he's already done. But yeah, I don't really have anything actually particularly to talk about in that regard. Thinking about it now.
Okay.
So there's nothing specific enough that comes to mind.
On a related note, have you read much of my stuff on Subscribestar?
I've no. So I've read some of the newer stuff. I think I got about halfway through the latest post and got distracted by something or ended up running out of time. But I don't think I haven't gone back to any of the archives. So I think there's been 2 or 3 posts.
Okay. I think you'll find some relevant stuff there, like about overreaching.
Yeah. Do you? I was going to ask. Do you like publish those after a period of time elsewhere, or do you?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I might later, but not currently. I've got around 400,000 words written for a new project, and I haven't figured out exactly what I'm doing with it. But I want to write a new set of articles related to yes, no, overreaching, buffers, paths forward, and epistemology, and so on. So I've been writing a lot of stuff related to that, and most of it is not going to be used in the main articles because I want to, like, I'm exploring the ideas and doing research and trying out different ways of writing about it.
Yeah. Okay. So some of that sort of comes out as experiments in Subscribe Star stuff.
Yeah, I've just been sharing some of the ones that are easier for other people to read without as much context, or that came out more like a standalone draft.
Yep. Is there a good way to, like, I'm just sort of looking through at the moment, and it's sort of big wall of text is sort of the description that comes to mind. Is there a good way to like get an index of the posts?
I have no idea. I haven't used Subscribestar as a viewer.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So I can find
What
the
I'm
first thing that
seeing is that you can just go through and click on the permalinks to the individual posts. But yeah, I don't see like an index.
does the. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the date is the permalink. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I found non-overreaching learning. That was. I'm not sure. Oh no, it must be May. Yeah, 7th of May. They've got international dates, or not international, but like archival type dates, year, month, day. Yeah, so one thing that that I haven't been doing particularly well, I sort of have. So the Trello thing that I've got. One thing I like in terms of thinking about the stuff I was listening to.
Briefly, if you search for the word tiers with a colon after it, you should be able to find every post to be able to like skim through quickly.
As in TIER?
Yeah. Or maybe I don't know if that's on your screen, but I see.
No, it's so I can. There's a few. So if I just I mean, fallible ideas is probably the easiest one. That
Okay, yeah.
like that's the author, and then there's a few stuff at the beginning, but then it's just it's just there's like one or two references in text, and otherwise it's just there. Actually, just thinking about it, it's probably pretty quick to write a little script to just pull out all the things like in the console.
Oh yeah, it looks like they all just have consistent links with a post ID. You just have to grab all the links on the page that are post/number and be able to find everything.
Cool. So just looking at overreaching stuff. Well, there's a lot more mentions of overreaching in the text rather than in titles by the looks. That's okay. It should be easy to find though because all the text is completely like it's all printed on one page. Cool. Yeah, no. So the journaling thing I was thinking about the idea of having like this public work tracker was partly to do with that. I mean, particularly to do with the idea of trying to like actually measure how much you get done, like what you intend versus what you do.
Yeah.
Which from memory was one. one of the big points of journaling.
Yeah, businesses have measurements and policies and processes as like very major components of how you run a business. And they understand why that's important. And then people try to do projects in their own life with very few measurements, very little process, and not much in the way of like explicit policies for how to do anything. And then it's a lot more disorganized and often doesn't work great.
Yeah, I think the idea of trying to communicate with other colleagues is probably a good. Well, it's like often we do that because we want to communicate things, but that forces us to write them down, and we get a lot of the benefits just from trying to do that. Whereas with internally, we don't feel that need, so we don't try to.
But yeah, that's actually something Goldratt emphasizes, is that verbalizing your ideas helps you think about them. Putting them into words is part of the thinking process, even if you don't share the words with anyone else.
Yep. Yep. No, I remember you mentioning that particularly in the in the episode. I think it was like one of the longer ones. It was like 25 minutes. It was quite good.
Yeah, people they think they know what they mean when it's just in their head. And I think a lot of that is an excuse because they know if they tried to write it down, they'd actually have a hard time.
I've definitely run into that sort of thing before. I feel like an idea is clear and I try and write down and I like get lost immediately. Like I
Yeah,
can get half a sentence out, but
and then they blame writing because they're like, well, it was clear in my head, but I'm having trouble writing. Therefore, writing must be hard and I'm not a practiced writer and that's what's going on. And, that can be a factor, but a lot of it is it's not really as clear in the head as it seems like.
yeah, it's just easy to fool yourself. Definitely. That and multiple problems at once, as in, like for example, these are good examples of some of my lower quality writing. Even if I can put it down, and it sort of is, even if it's clear to me, still doing like I'm going to be making multiple errors at the same time in terms of trying to write it. Like we saw in this paragraph with the different subjects and the lack of payoff and things like that.
Regarding the journaling more, I find people have a lot of trouble doing things on medium timelines, like getting them to follow up once a week, weekly, on trying to learn philosophy or something. A lot of times it's like they can work on something immediately, like locally, short term. Like I plan to do this in the immediate future. And they can plan to do things much later in the future, which usually means never. And then the middle is hard to work with. And it comes up a lot because there's a lot of discussions that are not urgent on the time scale of like 2 days. But 2 weeks would be a lot better of a plan than 2 months. Or 2 years.
I feel like for me and my projects sort of thing, I have a much like one of the big things that immediately starts dropping stuff off. And so knowing about this has sort of been somewhat helpful in trying to get around it. Is whether I can tackle it as a contiguous task or not, like whether I need to. So for example, say I wanted to build something, so I go on eBay and I buy some electronics. The fact that it takes, like I need to wait for 3 different packages that, arrive over the next 3 weeks, like that lack of being able to work on everything at once is a big problem in being able to continue the task. And those sort of discussions, those longer discussions have that quality because you can't bash everything out at once. You can't just, write until you're done. I don't think I've ever really, there's only a few documents where I've taken more than a single day to write and edit it, or maybe I come back and edit it, shortly afterwards. But there's only really one example I can think of which was about 14 pages in A5, I think. It was a contribution to a book about, or a textbook about blockchain architecture. And I think because of the back and forward with the principal authors, that was the only reason it sort of stayed like that. I finished it. But there's not many other, outside of business, there's not many other projects I can think of where I've been able to do, longer than to breach that gap, that middle length.
That makes sense. It takes a different sort of organization and project planning to spread out the actions over time and then make them fit together, rather than just doing like one big session. With writing, there are common ways to do it. One is to separate the writing from the editing. You can write it all in one sitting, and then you can do an editing pass later, and that's reasonably easy to do. Is to come back later and do editing, even if some stuff is like not loaded in your mind anymore and whatever. Especially if you're just editing like typos and stuff, it's easy to tack on later. Or if it's more structural edits, it's harder to tack on later, but still a thing some people know how to do. You also see it with books, like some of Popper's books are basically essay collections. It's the same with Rand. She has books of nonfiction books with articles, one article per chapter. And these are much easier to write because you can write every chapter independently, possibly even in one sitting, or one sitting plus editing sessions.
The virtue of selfishness is like that, right?
Yes.
I've only read the first chapter, but that was the impression I had. Or she might actually explicitly mention it in the foreword or something.
Yeah, so it's just a list of smaller projects that are independent, rather than a book where there's like cross references between all the chapters. So that's a lot easier. It's the same as writing like 10 short programs versus one big program where everything's interconnected.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, modularization is definitely feels like the way to get around that. Like having a module for, handling registration and a module for producing receipts and that sort of thing is sort of the programming equivalent of this smaller projects chunking.
Yeah. Modularizing writing is limiting in a way. Like, it's hard to do it without having some downsides. Because like the difference between a book that is independent chapters and a book like BOI or FOR where there's substantial connections between the chapters, you can definitely see some upsides to FOR and BOI. But they're harder to write. Like, being able to... The chapters are semi-modular. There's a fair amount of decoupling, but it's not as complete between the chapters, which makes it harder to figure out how to do them. And then when those chapters got a ton of editing over time, you have to make when you have connections and then you change one of the chapters, you have to change the other chapter or figure out how to do that, and that's hard.
Yep. I feel like particularly the middle, like a lot comes together at the end of BOI, but the sort of middle to middle late chapters are, you could rearrange them in quite a number of ways without losing too much. I don't think it's a bad arrangement, of course, but the first few heavily interdependent, and the last obviously need to come at the end.
That's part of what he did that made it easier. Is not every chapter links to every chapter. So it limits the number of linkings you have to deal with.
Yep. It also, just thinking about it, gives you quite a variety in the middle, in that there's lots of fresh stuff. Like I think chapter 8 mentions Popper's criterion, and then in like 13, the choice, is it? Or choices, where he talks about the apportionment paradox and so on. Then like you've had a lot of things in between, like morality and Everett's many worlds, etc. So it's quite fresh and engaging by comparison to trying to move everything to one big contiguous sort of block, all the democracy stuff here, or all the physics stuff here, etc.
Yeah, I think
But yeah,
the structure stuff is really important in general, and that people don't realize that structure is, to some extent, like more than 50% of dealing with knowledge. People sometimes just try to ignore it. Not so much in the software world. Like software is the main thing you do in software is organize knowledge. Like so much of it is overhead and glue and organizing things into libraries and documenting it and so on. And making good APIs and interfaces and
well, yeah, it occurs to me particularly in user interface stuff. Like in terms of the React, React Flux, Vue, like all of these things, a major component and selling point is state management throughout, or there at least if it's not directly involved, it's like there's a highly scalable sort of way. I mean the what do you call it? So I mean it's a bit confusing with this Flux on the screen, but the Flux was like the early, or one of the early like message sort of emit messages have one big sort of global state, but with no closed cycles or tight cycles on state manipulation. The idea of mutations and all that sort of jazz. And so it's sort of the like structure is sort of one of the major selling points of all of those libraries now, or all those methods. More
yeah.
so
So
than how
my
few
main
lines
point
are required for it.
is I think that what the software world knows, the intellectual world does not know. If you
Mm.
try to have a discussion with someone, they just try to focus on the topic. They do not want to have meta discussion about organizing the discussion in general. They're hostile to that. They think it's off topic. They think it's a dead end or a huge distraction. And so they don't put the effort into making complex discussions actually work. And it's the same when it's not a discussion, they're just thinking by themselves, is they don't do enough organizational and structural stuff to make complex thoughts actually work. They don't
Yep.
take it seriously, like it's a big project that needs a bunch of effort.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the software world is definitely better, but there's still a lot of resistance to structuring things the right way. Unfortunately, mostly because time is the trade-off, right? Is what I feel like. Well, there's time and skill, and so people don't want to go get more skills before they do the thing, and they want to do it quickly. So
Whether time's a trade-off is debatable, because generally the right structure saves you time over time. You don't want to
yes,
over-engineer though, so it's non-trivial to figure out like what would be over-engineering and how much structure do we actually need for this project and so on. So it's easy to make mistakes or disagree about the right thing to do, but at least people are trying to make judgments about that stuff and are pretty aware of the concepts, and they know about design patterns and modules and so on.
yeah, the basic stuff is definitely common, and people agree on that. It occurs to me that this is somewhat that trade-off is, and I agree with you. It's entirely like it makes a lot of sense to put a lot of effort into some things before you really get to any meat. But there's often conflicts in the expectations or desires that people have for the final product, and so if someone is not committed to the final product, they're not going to want to spend time on the structure. Whereas if another team member has a much grander vision, then they'll sort of
Yeah.
see it as sloppy not to, which is hard to actually overcome in terms of team dynamics and stuff, particularly when you get distracted at every conversation,
Yeah, that's
every
part of what
discussion.
happens in discussions, is I have a grander vision than the other person for where the discussion could go, because I think it could be a beginning of infinity. That like literally the rest of their life could be a subtree under this, where you just keep adding things and you never get stuck and never give up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually, and it
Yeah.
explains a lot of the impatience that people feel, because they
Yeah.
don't see it like that. They see it as like a thing to do for an afternoon, or at least that's how I have in the past. Um,
Yeah, it's
is
not
that each
just that
topic
though,
is
because
this
some of them
island.
like want to invent AGI or something. Like, some of them have grand goals or visions, but they still treat it like thing you need to do is just be really clever. They don't have good methods.
That's definitely yeah. I feel like that evokes a they should know better type feeling.
Yeah, some of it's pretty absurd. Like there's multiple people who want to build an AGI and they know about Popper and Deutsch, and they think their competitive advantage in the field of AGI is knowing critical rationalism, but they don't actually want to have discussions about Popper because they think they already know Popper, so now they can do the AGI part. And like they actually haven't read half of Popper's books and they haven't discussed what they've read, and they just want to move on because they're less interested in that part. But they also think it's their competitive advantage.
I'm not sure what they would like, because this is something I've thought about from time to time. I don't know what they'd move on to. Like, I feel like
coding.
So I feel like what would they move on to in that critical rationalism is, or these general ideas are an advantage in that it allows you to more effectively use knowledge and gives you some understanding of knowledge, like more so than like Bayesianism does. But it doesn't give you a starting point. Like, it's not like you can sit down and say, oh, now I'm going to code an explanation or whatever else.
There are several people who basically have very naive AI algorithm ideas that are not original or impressive at all, but they are in some sense inspired by Popper, and the person doesn't know enough to understand that they don't really have any substance to their idea. And they think because it's inspired by Popper, it makes it good. They have some sort of vague connection to how it kind of maps to CR epistemology.
Yeah. No, it's sort of funny when you say it like that. It's more transparently obviously wrong. Sorry, I'm just charging this. One of the headphones is low on batteries. Okay, cool. Is there anything else particularly that we should cover this session?
I don't think so. So you're going to work on grammar again before next session and work on the choice or reading FI stuff or something as well?
Yeah, so the priorities will be the choice. I want to, or the grammar and the choice. I want to finish off the grammar stuff finally and like summarize up to where I've read so that I don't continue reading ahead. So I've avoided like reading too much more. I've just been sort of in some spare moments, like marking more of the of chapters that I've read in terms of highlighting different phrases and stuff. And then either tonight or tomorrow, I'll have enough time to set aside to actually get that up to scratch again, or up to sort of the next point. I guess we should, well, just to mention as well, our schedule's 3 days a week now, right? Like 2 hours, 3 days a week, as opposed to 1 hour, 5 days a week. Yep. So I think that flexibility will probably, well, it'll definitely help me at the moment because I've got half a day of driving to do before or tomorrow.
Okay.
But yeah, cool. I think that's a good plan. I should be able to, yeah, get everything done by then. All right. I'm happy to leave it there if you like.
Okay. Yeah, see you next time.
See you next time. Cheers.